Welcome to the Books Brothers podcast, where we break down the most important books in history, science, and philosophy.
We are on a journey to explore the world through my personal favorite medium, books. I'm JD.
I'm Andrew, and on today's episode, we're covering Joe Henrich's groundbreaking exploration of how culture and psychology intertwined to create the modern Western mind. The book is called Weird.
And if you listen to his interviews, Henrik is so plain and like straightforward. People ask his opinions on politics or whatever. He's like, nope, don't, like basically I don't do it. He's just by the book, what's studied, what's published. He does not reach out and, extemporize on certain things. So yeah, you don't get much from him.
Dude, he's a well-practiced Harvard professor. You gotta stick in your lane, bro. Don't be.
Dude, yeah. I haven't heard anyone stay in their lane better than this guy. He just deflects every question. You listen to an interview and someone's like, doesn't this kind of like go against woke culture and individualism, whatever? And he's like, nope, I don't know. Next question. It's so, I'm like, yeah.
Dude, give me a book this long and this studied on woke culture, and maybe I'll be able to talk about it. Until then, see ya.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He's great. Sometimes you wish you had more from him, but when you get down to it, everything he says is true, and he's not like reaching far for anything, which is great.
Love that. Way to go, Henrik. Just a little recording note here for the program. We're picking back up after about a week delay from our first recording. This is such a good book. We needed to record it in multiple sessions, JD. And we are continuing on with chapter 7, titled Europe and Asia. In the first part of the book, he's zooming in on specific regions and showing how the expansion of papal Christianity was sort of the reason that these, norms spread, the behavior norms that we're talking about. A great little study he throws in there is Southern Italy is poorer and less weird than Northern Italy because the papacy, the Catholic Church, never conquered Southern Italy, which, by the way, is crazy that they're at Rome and they didn't get to Southern Italy, but okay.
Italy, when you hear about it, like how divided it was, and some of it was Byzantine, was conquered by the Eastern Orthodox Church. Sicily was, under Muslim influence until the Vikings took it over at, some point as part of the Varangian Guard or whatever, so it's like really complicated historically and to today. Like it's poor in Southern Italy, it's more clan based, and Northern Italy is much more a part of the continental European. And one thing we didn't hit too much on in the beginning that in his interviews he's mentioned multiple times is the influence of the Carolingian Empire, which is basically Charlemagne. And we briefly touched it that Charlemagne made kind of a pact with the papacy, how to govern or whatever. But it really, I think all of the studies that he's doing is really focused on like the papacy plus the Carolingian Empire is what created modern Europe, because the Carolingians were also behind the cousin marriage because they wanted to weaken the noble families just as much as the papacy did, to cement their hold on power and, make sure there's no strong families that are able to build up an army and everything.
And just, talking about Southern Italy, talking about Sicily, and just kind of, our endless debate, kinship versus, society. I mean, that's where you get the mafia and the family, it's all for the family. And, you call the boss, the Godfather. Oh, Godfather, I need your help. I'm doing a terrible impersonation of the Godfather movies, which I just saw the scene on my YouTube. Yeah, dude, I got the hands right, though. That's all I got. But you know what I mean? Like, that's where that whole structure of the mafia and the family and the Godfather, that's where that comes from. Right?
Yeah, so, and it's the reason it comes from Southern Italy.
Yeah. And now this chapter title is Europe and Asia, so we got to throw a little bit of Asia in there. So JD goes in the outline, Jay, I'm going to throw this back to you, but he goes, what about Asia? Easy. Rice farming equals collectivist equals non-weird. What are you saying? Yeah.
So in Europe, he breaks it down by time spent under the church's marriage and family program. And in Asia, obviously, that didn't happen. So he says that the breakdown is how much intensive paddy farming you were doing. So like to irrigate and terrace these lands to do rice cultivation is a huge group effort. And you need to really get the whole clan involved. And it involves like settling down, generation after generation and just toiling, head down in the dirt, in the mud. So those areas of Asia have much more clannish focus, much more higher rates of cousin marriage. They're poor, they're more collectivist, more holistic thinking. He often differentiates between holistic thinking and analytic thinking. So those areas are where you get the big family groups, the rice farming. So, quote, clan-based organizations foster precisely the kind of tight-knit, top-down organizations needed to tackle such cooperative challenges. Because not only are you digging the terraces and irrigating the land, but you're defending that land too. That's like good shit when you've made it. So that's where you better clan up.
He calls, another quote here, by the early 20th century, clans corporately owned about a third of the cultivated land in the Guangdong province and roughly 44% in the Pearl River Delta. So clearly that kind of organizational structure worked. He even analyzes self-survey results and compares the results to amount of rice farming in the area. Dude, way to go, Henrik. I love your survey.
The historical stuff is so good.
Yeah, it's really special. Basically, conclusion, less rice farming, more focus on the self, concluded.
Somebody asked a question in one of his interviews, like, what about China? Obviously, they never had the marriage and family program and everything. And he's like, basically, in 1950, communist China banned all the exact same things that the church banned, a millennium before. So first they banned first cousin marriage, and then they banned second and third cousin marriage. They banned polygamy. They banned concubinage, which is a very, word that doesn't get thrown around very often anymore. Child betrothal.
Are you sure it's not concubinage? Concubinage? I don't know.
I think, it's one of those words where the pronunciation changes once you add the "age" at the end. So child betrothal, they banned forced marriage, remarriage of widows, they banned dowries, infanticide, uncle-niece marriages. Quote, the powerful Chinese state has been doing over the last 7 decades what the church required centuries to accomplish in medieval Europe.
Dude, what a great sort of like connection between the church and China right there. That's really cool.
And he said only a big state could do it, like imagine in Bangladesh or Pakistan trying to ban cousin marriage. People would be like, hell no, I'm a Pashtun before I'm a Pakistani, So you need a super authoritarian state to be able to break the, kin bonds, where in medieval Europe, it was like culturally and religiously over hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Quote, without intensive kin-based institutions to organize production, provide security, and endow people with a sense of meaning and identity, individuals were both socially compelled and personally motivated to relocate, seek out like-minded others, form voluntary associations, and engage with strangers, which we're about to get to when we talk about cities, which are growing in the Middle Ages.
Dude, a couple hundred years after Christianization, there are cities starting to form. They got rules and laws surrounding individuals.
Yeah, that's the key, is that a lot of rules and laws were about families and like interchangeable, one brother dies, the next brother marries the wife, and now it's about individuals, and you can't just stand in different people based on their family connections.
It's he calls it non-relational morality. We have impersonal mechanisms for enforcing trust, contracts, regulations, rules, laws. Like somewhere in here in the book, it says like one of the things they did at some point in the early I think it was 1083. If your son committed a murder, it wasn't your fault as long as you got 6 reasonable men to sort of verify that you weren't there for the murder. You know what I mean?
Yeah. How hard would that be with like a couple uncles and cousins,
Yeah, exactly. Like, no. So, but like the fact that you had to separate a son murdering someone from its father is crazy. Like that's, to us, obviously we know that. So it's a potent mix, Jay. Starting to have these impersonal mechanisms. That's one of our friend of the show, Miles Quaritch, dude. This is starting to lead to a lot of cultural evolution. These cities are starting to form. Before we get too deep into the cities, though, we got to get to monogamy, because this is one of like the biggest hammer blows to the kinship, whole situation.
Exactly. So it is kind of, it's another one of those books where it's like you keep wanting to enter the historical timeline again, and he's like, one more thing. And monogamy is the big one more setting the table of what the church did that allowed for the rise. And again, because 1,000 years ago, Europe was and the Arab societies and Asian societies were way wealthier, way more complex, way better art. And monogamy was the last little, reason that Europe swelled up. So chapter 8, weird monogamy. And I like how he sets up the chapter. In 1521, when the Spanish and the Aztecs met, I mean, they've been separated for 15,000 years, these societies. And he says they're oddly similar. Quote, both were highly stratified cultural societies governed by complex state bureaucracies, led by hereditary rulers, and infused with powerful religions that both fueled and justified their subjugation of other societies. That's a great quote.
Well, that is kind of a cool way to relate the two societies together, for sure.
They do sound oddly similar when you put it that way.
But the one difference was the Spanish believed in monogamy and the Aztecs did not. Right? Mm-hmm. That's weird. Nice little tagline there, dude. That should be that's weird. And JD's dropping some big facts in here in the outline, Jay. 90% of hunter-gatherer societies are polygamous. That's crazy.
Yeah. And then he breaks it down into like a math problem. And he focuses on this one thought experiment of poor Samu.
Dude, and if you're watching on YouTube, just look at this graph because he graphs out Samu's issue right here. In the book. But tell us about Samu, Jay. What's up?
Yeah. So Samu is a poor guy in the bottom 50 percentile of society. And if he's growing up in a polygynous society, he's not getting a wife. No way. He can't afford a dowry. You know, who would want to marry their daughter off to poor guy when you've got a rich guy who can give you money?
Samu, just so we're on clear, he's just a hypothetical low status male in a polygamous society. That's who we're talking about. So, and this guy can't get a girl, right? So, yeah, back to you, Jay. I'm just trying to make sure we get what the hell's going. Who's Samu? So,
yeah. So suppose he happens on a drunk merchant in a dark alley. He could steal the man's money, and maybe he gets caught. Maybe he gets executed. But if he doesn't get this money, he's never going to afford a wife. So the only way that he's making, his genes are being passed down is if he maybe robs the guy and, goes for broke and then buys himself a wife. In a polygynous society, it's kind of an all or nothing. Like it kind of incentivizes a bit of violence in wife stealing, which is a huge problem in these hunter-gatherer societies. I mean, friends of the show, Yanomami, very familiar with that problem going on. But the example he gives is, what if poor Samu grows up in a monogamous society? Because in that case, he probably already has a wife, and maybe he's got a daughter at home. He's not incentivized to do any crime.
Yeah.
Quote, here, Samu has a stake in the future and has already avoided being an evolutionary zero. Thus, the evolutionary upside to any big economic payoff is less dramatic than in a polygynous society.
Dude, great quote, great exploration. And just to be clear, I don't know if we really said it. The problem with polygynous societies is the high status males take all the wives, and that's why you leave, let's call it 40-50% of the males have no wives, right?
Yeah. And nothing big authoritarian states hate more than a bunch of unemployed young men. That is just a recipe for disaster. And you can't get anything off the ground if if there's just going to be theft and low-level robbery, and you got a bunch of men with nothing to lose. What's going to happen? You give them all wives, it's much more egalitarian. Everybody's got a stake in the future. Everybody's mutually cooperating, involved in the betterment of society for their kids' sake. That's what he calls polygyny's math problem that doesn't shake out.
Two little hot takes from this chapter, but one, a lot of the high status males would prefer monogamy in this kind of thing, but maybe for the society it's not good.
High status males would prefer polygyny.
That's what, of course, that's what I meant. Yes, thank you. He says actually women might prefer polygamy as well, because that gives them more options for mates. You know what I mean? And that was like, whoa. Dude, no wonder Henrik sticks to his lane, because his lane's already got enough hot takes for him, so he can't.
That was a hot take. I didn't even put that in. I just thought it was a little hard to square with everything. It just doesn't fit the narrative well. But yeah, he gives very detailed reasons for why, in certain settings, like way back in hunter-gatherer days, it was better for women sometimes too, because at least you got a man who's providing for their son or daughter,
Crazy. The other little hot take too, he's talking about, this is how societies sort of coalesce and become more peaceful and strong. And he brings up the example of India, where polygamy was illegal unless you're Islamic. So it was illegal for Hindus, but not for Muslims but what was happening was all the Hindus that wanted multiple wives were converting to Islam so they could have multiple wives. And he goes, dude, and so the India Supreme Court in 2015, this is not 1015, all right? This is 10 years ago. they just put a law that polygamy is illegal, even if you're Muslim. So just crazy.
Wow.
So I know, dude, crazy, right? This is not.
I had no idea. It was
I know,
that
dude.
recent.
2015, dude. Crazy.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
Samu, you're welcome. We can only have one wife in our society.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah. The other bit that he touches on for monogamy and why monogamy is better for a society is that it actually lowers the testosterone of your average male. And we covered testosterone and Behave. Link somewhere.
Link in the description. We're still getting used to YouTube over here. Link in the description, Jake. Come on now. Yeah.
Quote, men with higher testosterone levels are more likely to be arrested, deal in stolen property, fall into debt, and use weapons in a fight. This is the poor Samu problem. They are also more likely to smoke, abuse drugs, drink heavily, gamble, and engage in dangerous activities.
But not under the church's watch, Jay. Quote, Christian monogamy was a particularly potent package for suppressing T levels. Love that. The church worked to end prostitution and sexual slavery while creating social norms that motivated communities to monitor men's sexual behavior and make violations public.
Yeah, so everyone's married. Competitiveness is suppressed. Risk-taking, revenge-seeking, all suppressed. Increasing impersonal trust and self-regulation. I mean, this is just the classic self-domestication. You know, monogamy is a method almost for domesticating all the wild males, giving them kids, lowering their T, stake in the future. It all makes sense when you think about it from this 100,000-foot level.
Yeah, dude. And he goes, crime rates are down 35%. Henrik literally says, quote, the church reached down and grabbed men by the testicles. Whoa, dude. Whoa.
Yeah, big religion castrating and domesticating us, a la Richard Wrangham, who we've talked about before, his book, something about how we domesticated ourselves over time. And the church is just accelerating that process. So he takes a natural experiment in China's one-child policy.
Sure.
And everyone wanted, this is unbelievable. Everybody wants boys in Chinese culture. They take care of you when you're older. Couples aborted tens of millions of baby girls. In 2009, there's 30 million surplus males in China. And crime rates rose 14% per year, 18 years after that policy is enacted.
That is a crazy statistic when you say it like that. Wow.
Big if true, I say.
Yeah, big if true. More points to the Western Church. The rich and the poor, the kings and the poor were held to the same rules. This is the whole Fukuyama rule of law stuff. Jay, shout out to Fukuyama, Origins, Political Order. The kings of Europe were restricted to rules that Chinese emperors, Egyptian pharaohs, Muslim sheiks would laugh at these European kings. You have to follow those rules? What a loser. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Low T suckers over there.
God, exactly.
They're cucked by the rule of law. Too online.
Oh, good stuff, dude. Good stuff.
So we have smaller, more mature, more intentional nuclear families. Big word, the nuclear families. And they're moving away from the tyranny of cousins. They're developing their own little plot of land. They're moving out of their parents' houses into their own houses. They're going to the city. They're starting independent households. That's increasing property rights. That's increasing accountable government. We're about to enter the historical timeline with charter towns and guilds and universities and sports teams. So all these things are institutions. These are the foundations above which institutions climb or under which institutions uphold.
Quote, when folks began forming towns, guilds, and religious institutions in the 10th and 11th centuries, they would have applied intuitions and insights gained from living in monogamous nuclear families, not from life in patriarchal clans or segmentary lineages. And I got to say, dude, that's kind of like, we're kind of like summing up part 1, part 2. We're coming up on part 3 of the book here. But he talks a lot about guilds and
charter towns.
Yeah, charter towns, guilds. It is a very unique aspect. I never really thought of a guild as being as important as it was.
Guilds kind of, went away, but they definitely took the place of king groups. So we talked about it a little bit in the book on the Medici. The banks started from little families. That was the only way to get everyone to cooperate. And eventually, a guild kind of takes the place for the family. And that's kind of a mutual oath between people that we're going to do this thing together and, back each other up and abide by these rules or whatever. So let's just get to it. Chapter 9 is of commerce and cooperation.
With 2 great historical quotes from the 1700s, we got Montesquieu in 1749, friend of the show. Montesquieu, quote, Commerce is a cure for the most destructive prejudices, for it is also a general rule that wherever manners are gentle, there is commerce, and wherever there is commerce, manners are gentle.
Another
quote,
self-domestication thing is the markets and commerce domesticate ourselves.
Quote, the invention of commerce is the greatest approach toward universal civilization that has yet been made by any means not immediately flowing from moral principles. End quote. That's Thomas Paine, 1792, Rights of Man.
Friend of the show, maybe, if we knew more about him.
Yeah, no, dude, common sense. Commerce and markets create interpersonal morals and norms. Even though surface level, commerce has nothing to do with morality.
That's cool about the Thomas Paine quote is it doesn't flow out of moral principles. They kind of lead to moral principles just by their very nature.
Third quote, Joe Henrich. Market norms establish the standards for judging oneself and others in impersonal transactions and lead to the internalization of motivations for trust, fairness, cooperation with strangers, and anonymous others. That's the big kind of theme here, too, is like you got to start dealing with people you don't know. You need to have trust with impersonal strangers, basically.
Yeah, and you need a framework for that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the individualism that the church built is kind of the framework for being like, you know, cross boundary trust. And then commerce is the way that really kicks it in and actually, you know, makes it beneficial for everybody. You know, so far banning cousin marriage hasn't done a whole lot for, you know, Europe. It's still kind of, you know, it's just climbing out of the dark ages in the early part of the millennium. If you guys are liking what we're doing, if you like the content, send it to a friend, like and subscribe. We're a growing channel. We love seeing the comments. We love every new subscriber. So we just wanted to take a moment to appreciate you being here, and back to the show.
Like the church, markets and commerce are weird psychology catapult. There's some studies that we're going to go through. The studies that Henrik does, they match up cooperation rates with distance from the market, the town market, right? And the conclusion, every hour closer to the town market, the center square, the place of commerce that you are, your city is, you have a 15 percentage point increase in your cooperation scores. That's crazy.
That is super crazy. Love those studies. Yeah. So cool. So, and more cooperation lines up with more voluntary organizations. They find that closeness to a market is associated with better forest management. That's like healthier commons, less tragedy in those commons, because people are, you know, able to enforce each other. Basically, you can't just cut down every tree. You know, we're doing manageable amounts. Maybe only the old trees we're cutting down. Quote, in worlds dominated by impersonal markets, people depend on anonymous markets, insurance, courts, and other impersonal institutions instead of large relational networks and personal ties. Interpersonal markets can thus have dual effects on our social psychology. They simultaneously reduce our interpersonal prosociality within our in-groups and increase our impersonal prosociality with acquaintances and strangers.
Great quote. He talks about how did commerce kick off in Europe. Some big European power takes their boats over to the Egyptian beach, and I don't know exactly who was who here, but they put all the stuff that they want to sell on the beach. They go away, they go back in their boats, they light up some smoke. You know, hey, we're here to trade. The tribes come out, they pile up a bunch of gold on the shore, they go away. The boat guys come back in, they look at the amount of gold, they're like, no, that's not enough. They go back out, they release some smoke, not enough gold, you know? Wow. Like that's how trade started, right? That's like the first trade, you know what I mean? And it's like, it's cool to see like, okay, that's where we were, and now we're creating these norms, we're creating these markets that people can go into and trade, and we all follow the rules.
He talks about it being based on kin groups to start, because that's the only way you get people to trust. Like, how can you tell if the guy selling you this sword tempered the iron with only 0.5 percentage point of carbon, aka it's a piece of sword, or 1.2% carbon, in which case it's a good sword. And so before, if you were a fellow Jew or if you were a fellow Norseman or whatever, you know, there's a little bit more trust, and eventually the church is swallowing those kin groups, and then you can swear oaths, you know, not to Shamesh, but to the big lord above, Papa J. So that was the only way to get it off the ground. And once those kin groups start getting out of the way, and oaths and, you know, laws and norms and everything start making up for that lack of kin group.
By 900 AD, church entrenched itself several regions in Western Europe, driven out most of the religious competitors, and really tapped people's tribal psychology to create this unified Christian super identity. We're Christian. We believe in markets. We believe in the rules that, these towns are creating for us. And so it's like we took the scaffolding of the Christian sort of belief system and just added some more stuff to it, right?
Yeah.
So,
and then entering the historical timeline again, Middle Ages, city populations grow from 3 to 13%. And then in the Netherlands, where commerce and laws and stuff really got started, it was over 30%. So from origins of political order, the towns were largely responsible for the dissolution of serfdom in Western Europe. That's kind of why serfdom went away in Western Europe, which is again more, beneficial for the society overall.
Yep.
The real secret that Henrik talks about is not just towns, but self-governing towns, so that it can experiment with institutions. And that is something that China or the Islamic world never ever had, he says. They never were able to have self-government in any of those societies. And the fact that self-government developed in Western Europe is largely responsible. Fukuyama would love that shit. For the rise of Western Europe.
And dude, an absolute banger graph in the book. I'm going to show you guys on YouTube right here. But basically he's like, dude, the amount of time you've had, exposed to the Catholic Church, the chances that you create self-government in your city, like skyrockets. That is one of the banger graphs of the book right there. I even wrote "boom" in the book. I was so pumped about it.
That is a good graph.
Yeah, so
and
really cool.
And he says self-governing started out kind of in northern Italy, which we talked about. And man, what a cool book to do. That was kind of the in-between weird and origins of political order book. Mm-hmm. But then he talks about charter towns more specifically, which started, the first one maybe was 965 in Germany, when I say ironically, given Germany's history, it was a group of Jews and maybe other traders who started a town called Magdeburg. Yeah, they got some Holy Roman Emperor to give them special rights, eventually being called Magdeburg rights. And those were laws about civil administration, property rights, guilds, market norms, criminal laws, and everything.
But the thing about these Magdeburg rights and why they're so important is it started in Magdeburg, but then Magdeburg had daughter cities, they called it, where it's like, we're just going to copy your policies are working pretty good, so we're copying those. And so somewhere I'm lost in the book, but it was like 83 towns like 200 years later had like Magdeburg charters like copied from that town.
Yeah.
And so that created this sort of, we're all mimicking each other, we're all like following these same rules together. So
cultural evolution.
Yeah, baby.
And then we haven't forgot about England. London got a charter from William the Conqueror. Quote, Londoners were permitted to elect their sheriffs and control their own courts. The 24 aldermen who governed the city swore an oath to manage the affairs in accordance with the charter. Here, as in Magdeburg, formal laws were laying various elements of intensive kin-based institutions to rest.
This was in the thousands. This is William the Conqueror, like about 200 years pre-Magna Carta. But he had a charter. You're allowed to own and sell land rather than your kin group. You're an individual. You can own and sell it. You can't charge blood money for crimes that relatives didn't commit. Interesting. No more trial by combat. Good one.
Bummer.
Like that one. Yeah, bummer. Okay, bummer. Yeah, so that's some of the rules. Like that's the chart. That's the kind of things that were chartered in London in the early thousands.
Kings and emperors weren't doing this because of human rights. They want more money, and self-governing towns are growing towns. So you're collecting property taxes, you're bringing more people in, possible soldiers. But eventually, 90% of the English population lived within a few miles of a farmer's market, which was a game changer. And that's what Napoleon calls them, a nation of shopkeepers. So what kind of people do you think are moving away from their kin groups and their rural homes into these towns? They're the proto-weird people. They're individualists, they're entrepreneurial, they're high openness, and maybe more dopaminergic too. We talked about that in the dopamine book, link in comments.
Dude, love that. Way to bring up.
We're linked in comments podcast now.
Dude. I mean, the dope Molecule of More was an incredible book. Just like we're just dopamine hounds, all of us. So that was great. But the people that are sort of like chasing the newness are definitely more dopaminergically influenced and would move to the towns. Chapter 10, Domesticating the Competition. JD is going to give us his favorite Blood Meridian quote to start the chapter.
It makes no difference what men think of war. War endures. As well ask men what they think of stone. War was always here. Before man was, war waited for him.
Whoa.
And Yeah, ancient DNA shows entire human lineages are extinguished and replaced on the reg. Always happen. There's ghost populations moving around. We see one, boom, it's gone. 10% of the world's population is like directly descended from Genghis Khan. Wonder how that happened. War makes you more cooperative with your in-group. The weird institutions of Europe are making our in-groups more impersonal. He's saying kind of that war almost accelerated the weird psychology because, we're all Dutchmen or we're Christians or whatever. Quote, war exposure during the preceding century raised the rate of urban growth by at least a quarter. But you know what else increases urban growth? Big religion. For each crusader who fought in the Crusades, urban residents from their town grew by over 2,000 people, and the town was more likely to develop a representative assembly.
That is an insane statistic. Really cool.
Yeah.
So not so in the Chinese or Islamic societies. So combining these different trends, war plus weird institutions equals a catalytic process, a tornado of cultural evolution, you might say.
You might say.
And we're going to drop a big quote on you to kind of summarize where we're at in the book here. Quote, market norms for impersonal exchange were spreading and gradually being inscribed into business contracts, commercial laws, urban constitutions. In this new context, by deepening people's commitments to their voluntary associations, including their towns, strengthening their norms of pro-sociality towards Christian strangers, and bolstering their religious faiths, war shocks would have spurred the formation of new impersonal institutions, including those related to government and commerce, encouraged the adoption of laws centered on the individual, and motivated greater contributions to the public good at the level of communities and eventually nation states. Dude, that really is an incredible way to sort of put it all together. It sounds like that quote could be from Origins of Political Order as well, Jay. That's crazy.
Yeah, totally. And then he takes the chapter to other domains of competition. Quote, does increasing the competition among firms influence people's psychology in ways that parallel those created by war? The kind of question that answers itself, yes, obviously, that when people move into a more competitive industry, their impersonal trust goes up. So he moved on from firms, and then he's like, there's even competition in the religious marketplace. And then here's the quote about that, about how it really reflects itself in the United States.
In the United States, centrality of religious freedom and the lack of a state religion may have combined with our porous social safety nets to fuel over 2 centuries of intense competition among religious organizations. These patterns suggest that America's unusually high levels of religious devotion, including beliefs in biblical literalism, angels, and hell, is the consequence of intense interchurch competition. End quote.
He found in certain studies that combination of no state religion and low social safety nets means there's lots of interchurch competition. That's like one of the most American stories ever. People coming here, preaching, building churches, bringing in followers. So he actually found that states with less safety nets had more church attendance, more religious competition. The United States is off the charts as far as the first world is in religiosity. We're like getting up to India, Africa levels of religiosity, and it's kind of an odd thing, and that's what he finds, no state church and low social safety net. So that's just an interesting aside.
I read this book, and I didn't catch that little theme that you're pulling out here about the interreligious competition in the United States. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's just one little paragraph, but yeah, that was such a big, you love when a book has, so many big ideas that one little paragraph stands out.
Dude, love that. Summing up the chapter here, we got cooperation that war brings is only helpful, and JD, this is such a good line you wrote. You got to get your kin group out of the in group, dude. I love that, dude. That should be on our. If Books Brothers was the kindergarten class and we had like big posters on the wall, that would be one of the. Yeah. Cultural and institutional competition is good. Just continuing the chapter here, like kin group out of the in group. Cultural institutional competition is helpful. Universities, guilds, sports teams, charter towns, all new forms of non-kin in groups. Healthy ways to compete. Different charter towns, different sports teams. And contrasting with Western Europe, China had none of these.
In the 1950s, the communists burned genealogical records.
Whoa.
The communist state trying to do the same things that the church did culturally, they're trying to do it authoritarianly. And, there's an argument to be made about which is more effective. I think that comes up somewhere in here that, you want these changes to be bottom up, culture first rather than top down. But isn't that crazy? The communists think there shall be no group higher than the state. The state is the highest group. So they're getting rid of genealogies and trying to break those apart because those are, ways to form groups apart from the state.
Now we're going to take you back to AP history, high school class here, but the Europe, we're talking about these guild competitions, all these different groups. What does that lead to? Joint stock companies, London, Bruges, Amsterdam. They used to meet in coffee shops. They had a chalkboard list of disreputable people. Don't do business with these people. They eventually started forming associations of stockbrokers. Eventually, they would exchange stock amongst each other. What do you think that's called? Stock exchange. Hello. Mm-hmm. They compete with different exchanges. I want to sell on that one. They're more trustworthy over there. Talking about like competition, like sort of creating the culture here. After defeating Napoleon at Waterloo, the Duke of Wellington explained that, quote, the battle was won on the playing fields of Eton, which basically means like all my guys were playing sports since they grew up. That's why we kicked Napoleon's ass. Like that's an awesome quote to think about. So
I'm even including a little sports riff for you because he talks about Britain.
You put a little riff in just for me about sports. You're so nice.
Yeah, he says Britain invented most of the like cricket, rugby, soccer, hockey, American football. These all come from Britain, and that was kind of another avenue for competition, for group formation, for rule of law, sort of.
He leaves it to Duke of Wellington to explain it. Like we beat Napoleon because of sports. So also he brings up political parties that started in Britain. So there's another sort of like in-group competition, and that's not a kin group.
Guilds are kind of transforming in different areas. So like one guild of stockbrokers eventually leads to a stock exchange. Guilds for certain people with political ideas leads to political parties. And so that's kind of the transformation from the Middle Ages to the modern age, is the guilds turning into all these different things. And then here's our last big sum up quote of the chapter, quote, our weird institutional frameworks began developing during the High Middle Ages as people who were increasingly individualistic, independent, nonconformist, and analytic started assorting themselves into voluntary associations, which in turn began to compete. In the long run, competition among territorial states favored those that developed ways to harness and embed the psychological and economic effects of nonviolent intergroup competition.
What a chapter. Chapter 11, Market Mentalities. Start off with friend of the show, Adam Smith of Invisible Hand fame. Quote, whenever commerce is introduced into any country, probity and punctuality always accompany it. A dealer is afraid of losing his character and is scrupulous in observing every engagement. When the greater part of people are merchants, they always bring probity and punctuality into fashion, and these, therefore, are the principal virtues of a commercial nation.
So that's like the same thing from the last chapter, how like market mentalities and norms bring forth these morals that, they don't have inherently. You know what else commerce does to us? And this is like a big chunk of this chapter, European obsession over time. And he follows the origins of the clock and like how places that got clocks sooner, where they have more norms and everything.
The study that he covers is whatever year, so clocks were all the rage in the Middle Ages. Like clocks became huge. You got to show up to church on time. You got to start work on time. You got to stop work on time. We're chopping up the day into little sections. We can measure how much work you're doing. So clocks became this big thing. And obviously back then there was one clock for the town. That's why the church had the bell and the clock. So that, he goes, the earlier your town got a clock, the more, we'll call it time conscious, your town was. And that sort of trend still exists today. Like the earlier you got a clock in the 1200s, or town 100 miles away got a clock in the 1500s, you guys are going to be, I'm making up the numbers, but 20% more conscious about being on time. Clock oriented. Dude, it's crazy. I was reading this book in Brazil, traveling with my wife and her family, and they're like, when did Brazil get clocks? And I was like, based on your time conscious level, not until recently. Okay.
After the Anglo country or Northwest Europe. Yeah. He talks about it, how they started in Northern Italy, which are classic Renaissance, and then they move up and really take hold in Northwestern Europe. And if 1450, we've got 20% of urban centers with a clock. And by 1600, most churches had one. So I guess it almost follows the church too. The only way to centralize all that engineering prowess, a big enough building, tall enough bells, testicles, so it's another +1 for the church. And he even says the earlier your city adopted a clock, the faster it grew. We got more elephant talk. We're making time, saving time, buying time, finding time. Ben Franklin is the one who, really coined it. Time is money. That's like the weirdest thought there is to equate time to money. Basically, nobody in our ancestral history would have thought time is beads or time is shells, Henrik did anthropological work in Fiji, and they're never on time. So he bought all his assistants watches. This was a great little anecdote, wasn't it? And,
yes.
Time is just not salient. So this watch is just kind of a fashion statement of, look how close I am to the, Western scientists. Like, looking at the time watch, no way. I don't, he found out that their watches weren't even working, or they set the times wrong. Like, nobody even paid attention to it, but they all wore the watch. It's just not salient in that society.
They didn't care. And yeah, that was his story. It was like one of his researchers. He's like, dude, I gave you the watch. Like, why were you on time? And then he looked at the watch and he's like, the date and time was like 3 weeks ago. I'm like, bro, you haven't charged your watch, bro.
Yeah.
Another incredible study related to this time consciousness of weird people. His grad students did a big global study of pace of walking. How fast do people walk in different cities? And it's incredible. The more individualistic you are, the more weird your city is.
The culture,
the culture is, the faster the walking pace. And dude, such a good study and so good. I'm dropping it. Look at that graph. It's like literally a graph of walking pace versus individualism. And there's just a trend line straight up and to the right, basically. So
yeah.
London and New York are the fastest walking cities, the most individualistic cities. Guangzhou and Jakarta, slowest walk, slowest individualism. Crazy.
Yeah, they went into post offices in time to buying stamps. Quote, in these social worlds, achieving personal success and building relationships required individuals to invest in their own attributes and skills, while at the same time getting stuff done, stacking up individual achievements, facing greater impersonal competition, artisans, merchants, monks, and magistrates, all aiming to cultivate reputations for punctuality, for self-discipline, and precision. The new mechanical clocks didn't initiate the shift towards clock time psychology in Europe. Rather, they simply marked and catalyzed a process that was already underway. So basically, our psychology is telling us, I want to stand out from the crowd. Clocks help me do it. Eventually, the town gets a clock, and that helps everybody be like, we're on time, we're doing this and that. Yeah, so if you're just a member of your kin group, you're not incentivized to work very hard. So here we're going to a non-weird. This is a quote from an anthropologist studying, non-weird people about how they think about clock time. Quote,
specifically, sorry, Jay, desert herders in Algeria is who he was studying.
This is from a quote from Pierre Bourdieu, who is a good anthropologist or sociologist, talks about culture and stuff a lot. But, quote, the profound feelings of dependence and solidarity in the Kabyle peasant foster an attitude of submission and nonchalant indifference to the passage of time, which no one dreams of mastering, using up, or saving. All the acts of life are free from the limitations of the timetable, even sleep, even work, which ignores all obsession with productivity and yields. Haste, this is the best part, haste is seen as lack of decorum combined with diabolical ambition.
Dude, it's funny. I had that underlined in my book and I was going to bring it up, but you already had it in this outline. Dude, that is such a good contrast. Yeah. That Kabyle peasant farmer sounds really weird to me, but I guess I'm the weird one, right?
Yeah, and you could just imagine in that society, like, slow the hell down, bro. We're just hurting here, don't stand out, you've got your place in society and no need to, do anything. If you get more animals, I'm going to ask you to borrow them anyways. That's kind of the, the issue with kin groups is you're just always borrowing, help, then you can help me pay for my wedding and all that kind of stuff.
Can I just say something real quick?
Yeah, please do.
We don't have to keep this in, but this is just, I live in a place where most of my neighbors don't have a cell phone. They don't have a watch. I think it's 5% of the country is formally employed. So mostly it is all just farming.
Where? Tell people where you are.
I'm in Zomba, Malawi, which is a small town in sub-Saharan Africa. All day long, I can go for a walk around the block and everybody is outside because also the houses are in general 9 feet by 15 feet. So everyone's just outside all day long in community. all day long. If a couple's going to have a fight, you can hear the whole thing, like the whole village will come and gather around. It does feel like time doesn't exist. Most people's jobs are like maybe go check on their field. Like people will walk, up to 5 kilometers to go to their field. They come back and then they make dinner, but there's no clock really at all, and it's more energy based. Like when you run out of energy, you go home because you need to eat. The fact that you can like go on a walk and see everyone in your community at pretty much any time of the day except for on Monday and Thursday, where people go to the market and they're selling whatever. It's like people farm, but then they have this like side hustle of just like selling vegetables for somebody else. Mostly men. They're playing like we called it Mancala growing up. Do you guys know that Mancala game? It was like you had little marbles.
Mm-hmm. With the little rocks and the little
play
thing.
This 8 hours a day. No joke. Like women are doing 90% of the work. Men are playing Mancala, drinking cheap maize beer. Beer is just like a catch-all for alcohol. But yeah, that's like the lifestyle. Women taking care of.
Wow. Talk about not thinking time is money.
Yeah, no.
The opposite of that.
Sounds like we should buy Chris's town a giant church clock, and then 500 years from now, he'll be cooking, baby. Yeah. Let's talk about pygmies. You got a nice little section right here on pygmies.
The pygmy people are semi-nomadic. They're living in the jungle in the Congo, basically. First of all, they make the most beautiful music I've ever heard. Stunning music, and that's like not all they do, but that's what they do in their free time. Is there's a whole season of the year, like months upon months, where they just sing late into the night, wake up late in the morning. Where's breakfast? I don't know. Go out into the jungle, find something, bring it back. Like they're singing songs late into the night, having a great time, gossiping about other people all the time. Anyone tries to stand out too much, you're getting gossiped about and shunned a little bit. They fail the marshmallow test so damn hard. It's unbelievable. What weird people pass a marshmallow test of like $100 now or $500 a year from now, and we'll take the $500 a year from now a lot of the times. These people, only 18% took 5 times the reward the next day. $1 today, $5 tomorrow. Pfft. Tomorrow? Who's thinking about tomorrow? I'm staying up late. I'm singing songs. If I got $1 today, I'm buying booze for all my buddies. We're getting drunk. We're singing, just like talk about cultural values, accelerating your groups towards different ends or whatever. And these people are just having a great time.
Dude, the marshmallow test basically defines the entire world, dude. I don't know what's up with this marshmallow test, man.
Yeah. And pygmies who live in town, because the towns are where they go to work or they sell their goods or whatever. So there's pygmies that live in town, and they're weirder than their jungle dwelling peers. And they take the 5x reward the next day at about 50%. So more than double the rate. It just shows how your psychology shifts depending on your location and, the groups you're around and what your goals are.
We have a nice quote here about why tight kin groups don't engender self-control. Quote, intensive kinship, through its strong normative obligations to a web of distant relatives, may create pressures that similarly disincentivize the cultivation of self-control or patience. Henrik speaking. I've seen this frequently in Fiji. An industrious person works hard to save money, but then some distant cousin or brother needs cash for a funeral, wedding, medical procedure, so there goes the nest egg. This makes sense because intensive kin-based institutions manage risk, retirement, and harmony collectively through relationships instead of via individual self-control and secure savings.
And we talked about that in Sapiens, how, your kin group was the insurance, was the hospital, was your bank, all these things. And it's not a very good way to run any of those companies because, someone's going to come, oh, this person died, you need to pay. You know about that, Chris, or like, I've got a wedding, I need to pay the dowry, whatever. Hey, you're doing real well. Help me out this time. I'll help you out next time. You're not really allowed to build up a large, surplus because of the kin group is just going to feed off of it,
He gets into personality psychology tests. Jay, when we first started getting into this, we were Myers-Briggs. We've sort of leveled up to the big 5. I think that's the better one. I know.
That's the scientific one.
That's the scientific one. And so those are big 5 personality traits: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism.
Acronym OCEAN.
The point here.
That's the helpful thing.
OCEAN. That's a way to evaluate different people's personalities. But the point that Henrik makes, none of those are in non-weird people. So really, that whole ocean Big Five framework is for weird people, right?
In non-weird cultures, you're a farmer, maybe you're a hunter-gatherer. So where does openness to experience come in if you're those things? Like, who cares if you're agreeable or neurotic? You're either making arrows, you're making canoes, or you're farming barley. There's no avenue for you to express those different aspects of personality. And he says when anthropologists studying Amazonian hunter-gatherers found only 2 traits that people reliably differed on, either industriousness, which is kind of conscientiousness, and then prosociality. Maybe that's extroversion. So you're either hunting harder or you're hanging out with people, making them feel good. Those are 2 ways that you can express yourself. The openness to experience and the neuroticism or whatever just kind of don't come into your personality. You're kind of a generalist is what he's saying, and now we're like super specializing in different niches and we're trying to stand out from everybody. So we're almost fractally, breaking into different little avenues of personality and they're very important to us. So we're, accentuating them and everything.
Not in Europe, though. And Jay, I think you got to read this section here because I'm not sure I'm following, but you're talking about not in Europe.
Speaking of trying to stand out for ourselves, like he makes the point that if you're in a kin group, you are supposed to act differently. This is another one that only came up on my 3rd reading where I was like, so in a kin group, you're supposed to act differently to different people. To your parents, you're submissive. If they're your cousin on your father's side, maybe you're different to them. Our kind of inherent drive to act differently towards different people is totally normal, totally good. You would be weird if you acted the same around different people who are in different stations or whatever. So he's saying in our weird society, we value consistency and we find it weird if someone's talkative with one person and not with another, like we are the same with our parents as we are with our nieces and nephews. That's really weird. And so he says, quote, individuals increasingly sought consistency to be themselves across context and judged others negatively when they failed to show consistency because we don't want to be two-faced. So he's saying that our own inconsistencies bug us because, we're all trying to be consistent. And this is where he says we're always looking for our true selves. That's where this desire to, follow our bliss and to discover yourself and know yourself and be yourself. All these things are a modern weird impulse for us. That's what's creating all this anxiety of I've got to go discover myself or whatever. It's there is no self to discover. You're supposed to act differently in different circumstances. He says, what does he say? People are always looking for their true selves. Good luck, let me know when you find it. So I was like, holy shit, that's a really cool point. These pygmy people I was talking about earlier, they're not looking for their true selves. They're having a great time. They're singing in the woods with their buddies, and we're like, man, what's my calling? What should I be doing? We're the ones killing ourselves at, a million times the rate they are, So that was a really cool, powerful point.
Here, people will be friends for 6 months, 2 years. They won't know each other's names. It doesn't come up. Groups of people get together and they won't even ask each other any questions about who they are. They'll just kind of sit in community. I mean, also people are very comfortable with silence, but yeah, people won't discuss what they do. They won't just you ask people their favorite food. They look at you like you're crazy. I need to have a favorite food for what? Everybody's answer is just, I don't know, SEMA, which is just saying potatoes or whatever, So, yeah, it's been, I think, really good for me to kind of be in this. I think it has really made me question some of my own weird needing to be unique, needing to express myself. Yeah. And I feel like it's been taking off a heavy backpack. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the individuation that we, reward kind of has a negative feedback loop in a way, and we're always what is my true self, or what is my favorite food? I have to have one, that I have to have a job that expresses who I am deep down, and there is no who you are deep down. You're different with different people, you're different in different situations. That's one of the reasons why in our society we're always unhappy. Maybe.
I just want to point out to all the Books Brothers listeners, we sent a weird guy to a non-weird society 7.5 years ago just to pull back the research for all you guys today to help us cover this book properly. So you guys are welcome. Yeah. He's been doing 8 years of reconnaissance in Malawi right now. So he's bringing the heat to us. So Jay,
just for this podcast.
That's right, baby. All for the pod.
Yeah, and so carrying on that and going back to the outline, we're focused on ourselves, we're focused on our mental states. That's depressing. John Haidt in that other book, what's that, The Anxious Generation or something?
Yep.
That individual focus is kind of anxiety producing, can be kind of depressing because any kind of thought loops that are kind of self-reflexive generally bring you down. When you poll people, what are you doing right now and how do you feel? If they're just thinking in their heads, chances are they're not feeling as good as they would be if they were doing something. It's a double-edged sword, basically. So that's our focus on mental states, basically.
Yeah, our focus on mental states and talking about sort of the individualism is what created this incredible society that we have today.
Yeah.
But maybe the pendulum has overswung and it's also creating some of these anxieties that we have. And maybe we could take a cue from the non-weird world and kind of pull back a little bit that might create more happiness across the weird societies. More alignment with evolution. Summing up, Jay.
Markets and commerce incentivize us to stand out. We're incentivized to cultivate reputations for hard work and self-control and patience. We're choosing occupations that best suit our own unique attributes. People in the Middle Ages start moving to urban centers, and they move to centers that value skills. So the mobility of skills, being able to move anywhere, increases the value for certain skills. We're joining groups that enhance competition and enhance cooperation because they're all following the same rules and norms. We're finding ourselves, we're making time, we're investing in our futures. These are all very weird things in historical terms. And we're breaking away from our wise elders and our venerable traditions. And we're therefore more impersonally pro-social with each other. So that's like the cultural, psychological effects of going from the Middle Ages to the modern ages, kind of setting up the part 4, birthing the modern world, chapter 12, law, science, and religion.
All the stuff that we just discussed is a recipe for individual rights. And that's like a
capital I, capital R.
That's a big capitals there. That's a big concept that doesn't exist in reality. There's no such thing as individual rights that humans have not created, right? That's a human creation. Quote, how would the residentially mobile individuals who were flocking to urban centers in various regions of medieval Europe have thought about law? Freed from the security of kin bonds and compelled to navigate a world of impersonal markets, competing organizations, and growing occupational specializations, they would have increasingly focused on their own attributes, intentions, and dispositions. With a newly analytic orientation, they would have tried to explain and justify rules and laws by referencing people's internal properties, not their relationships or lineages. That's it really helps.
Yeah, he talks about how we became more analytic focused is that we have to judge people based on their disposition. We have to assign properties to them that we have to discover in our dealings with them, where in non-weird, the things that would be salient to us would be they're a member of that tribe, or they're my father's cousin or my brother's roommate or whatever, like those are the important qualities. And now we have dispositions that make us stand out.
The big point was these rights become rights above kings, including the kings. And that's a humongous thing. And Origins of Political Order talks a lot about how the Catholic Church sort of became more powerful than the kings and sort of put these rights on top of them. So they were subject to the rule of law. And that's a massive reason why Western Europe has dominated the last 500 years of the world. And the church had a huge part to say about that. Natural rights, quote, became increasingly intuitive for Christians with a proto-weird psychology and was crucial to the development of both the constraints on executive power, constitutional government, and notions of rule of law. Later, following their brethren in the legal realm, natural philosophers sought to explain the physical world.
Yeah, so they sought laws that explain the physical world. Boom, science.
So boom, we've got science.
We'll get a little bit to science. We've got a little side note on accountable government and that, how hard that is to develop. So when the U.S. took down the Taliban in the mid-2000s and the Taliban went into hiding in the hills, we tried very, very hard to give the Afghanistan a parliament, constitution. We tried giving him a president. And this is such a good I love the non-weird quotes, actually. On going through these, the non-weird quotes are my favorite because they're the ones different from us. So listen to this Afghani villager talk about Americans telling him about voting. We're like up in the hills. We're like, look, you're getting a government. You get to decide what government you vote. You fill out this form, whatever. You want to read the quote?
It's incredible, Afghani villager. This is so cool, dude. It's democracy. It's the coolest thing ever.
Quote, this is the Afghani villager talking. They're like, hey, what happened when we tried to give you the vote? He's like, well, a couple city men came around with slips of paper, and they went on and on about how we were supposed to make marks on them, and we listened politely because they had come a long way, and we didn't want to be rude. But we didn't need those city fellows to tell us who our man was. We always knew who would be representing us. Agai Sayyaf, of course. His family has lived here since the days of Dost Muhammad Khan and longer. Did you know that my sister's husband has a cousin who is married to Sayyaf's sister-in-law? He's one of our own. How are you going to start a constitution and a representative democracy with
a culture that doesn't value impersonal sociality? That's like what he keeps talking about, right? Like that's not impersonal sociality. That is my sister's brother-in-law's cousin, whatever. It's like, whoa. Yeah. So accountable government is a humongous thing in the concepts of sort of like creating weird societies, Western Europe.
Yeah, that was one of the three of origins. That was state authority, rule of law, and then accountable government.
You have to have a government that's accountable to the people. And in weird, he mentions each century of accountable government you lived under, your society gets plus 9% cooperation points.
It's like we're playing Magic.
Yeah, there's probably a graph in here that I missed, but like that's great. Like, the longer you've had accountable government, the more cooperative your society is.
The natural experiment he's basing this on, if you were a democracy before or after Napoleon, BN or AN, because if you lost to Napoleon, he was changing your government. That was the big thing. Like, there was a lot of accountable governments, especially in the Netherlands and England, maybe in these little city states in Italy, but France didn't really have one, I guess, until after Napoleon. And, all the places that he conquered, he just wiped their government clean and said, okay, we're putting in a parliament or whatever he did. So that's a super interesting natural experiment to, the governments that Napoleon instated are less cooperative than ones if you had a representative government before he came. So now we get to one of the big parts of the book. You want to bring us here?
Protestantism. We got a quote, friend of the show, Alexis de Tocqueville. Democracy in America, legendary book written in 1835 after he visited America. Quote, I think I can see the whole destiny of America contained in the first Puritan who landed on these shores as that of the whole human race in the first man. And he's calling it out because Puritans, let's call those guys super Protestants. So Protestants are sort of the most weird of the Western Europe people. So of the proto-weird societies, they were sort of the farthest to the weird side. And then you had the Puritans that took boats across to America. They were the weirdest of the weird, right?
Yeah.
And they sort of set the culture for America.
And there's a lot of debates in sociology and anthropology of like the Protestant work ethic. This whole chapter is kind of about the Max Weber's theory that Protestants and individualism and, our mental states really mattering is what caused capitalism and representative governments or, spurned those things along. And Henrich's point is saying that none of those things could have happened without the proto-weird psychology that the church had been building over the previous 1,000 years. So it's just kind of an extension of it and kind of an acceleration of it, but still fundamentally, getting king groups out of in groups and more individualization is what created Protestantism. Because where Protestants think even differently and talk about mental states mattering is that, are you really right with God deep, deep, deep down? Like you've got to interrogate your inner spirit once again, individually and say, am I right with God deep down? Because he's looking way down there. Like that's something Catholics weren't really, hey, come confess, do this, do that, get out of hell free card.
Pay some indulgences. That's the get out of hell free cards, right? Like,
yeah.
And Puritans are like, no. I actually have to be internally good with God. I have to look at my mental states, become an individual, and make sure my individual mental states are reflecting of what God
Because
wants me to be.
anti-Catholics, rituals won't help you, like you've got to be right deep down, Here's a Protestant belief that's relevant to the psychology we're talking about in the book. Quote, working hard to successfully pursue one's calling with diligence, patience, and self-discipline is doing God's work. Talk about weird psychology there. So it's only been about 500 years since we got this weird accelerant psychology. And he says that the Protestant psychology did increase economic development over the last 500 years. We open the book talking about how reading the Bible and telling everyone to read the Bible literally does change our brains, increases connections between our hemispheres and all sorts of stuff. So the mental state analysis that Protestants are encouraging us to do changes us in the long term.
Protestant countries are super weird. They're more individualistic. They trust more impersonally. Their diplomats get less tickets at the UN in New York. Henrik proves all of this by analyzing
the patchwork states, the not holy, not Roman, not an empire, So like he analyzes which ones turned Protestant early, and then shows that the places that turned Protestant more early give more blood, are more impersonally trusting, and all that. But in 1555, Europe created the Peace of Augsburg, and I looked up what war the peace ended. It's the Schmalkaldic War, which I'm putting in because that word is so great. Which also, the Peace of Augsburg has been described as the first step on the road towards a European system of sovereign states. So this is kind of even preceding the the Treaty of Westphalia, which we talk about in World Order. So some small German states got the right of religious freedom, and that's how Protestantism was allowed to grow. Basically, the states that flipped Protestant earlier had weirder attributes, worked harder, worked more, longer hours, all that. So there's our natural experiment that he's referencing.
And I got a couple little treats from this chapter before we move on. If you go to the Declaration of Independence, one of the most famous lines, we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal. And he writes in the book, Henrik writes, these truths are not self-evident. Like, that's just not true, whoa, talk about a hot take. Another little thing about these mental states that we're talking about. So like Protestants, like you have to align your inner intentions, your inner mental states with the way God wants you to be. This really translated well into law, into the legal profession, because it used to be if you accidentally killed someone or you planned a murder to kill someone, the crime is the same. You killed someone and the punishment is the same. And so the concept of, now we would call it first degree, second degree, third degree murder, or like premeditated, or all of these that is, the law now takes into account the intention of the individual when the crime was committed. That whole development came around. I mean, it used to be if you murdered someone, your dad gets in trouble. I mean, so we separated that. And now we've gone even further to be like, we have to determine intent. And obviously not just for murder, but for all crimes. So,
Super weird.
So they do a whole study on the different types of internal intent you can have where you're acting in self-defense. Did you have an inaccurate belief about the situation? Did you have moral commitments distinct from those of the community? Were you insane? Did you act out of necessity? Like all of those like questions, legal questions, were being developed during this time in Western Europe and very foreign to the non-Western.
You don't even have a way to think about these mental states unless you had thought about it as far as how God is viewing you, It's so interesting to think about how those mental states a lot of these things develop first in the church and then are used under law or science or government.
Another concept of sort of birthing the modern world, obviously law, he talks about the literal word discovery. These cultures didn't even have a word for discovery until the 1500s. So listen, here's the years that these different languages created the word discovery in their language.
Ooh.
1484, Portuguese. 1504 Italian, 1524 Dutch, 1553 French, 1554 Spanish, 1563 English. So that's the year that they developed that word in their language.
It sounds oddly similar to the years that they traveled to different countries and colonized it, Good tidbits.
Let's get to chapter 13, Escape Velocity.
Friend of the show, David Hume, quote, where an open communication is preserved among nations, it is impossible, but the domestic industry of everyone must receive an increase from the improvements of others. basically David Hume discovering cultural evolution, but the key point being open communication being preserved among nations. So that's secret of our success right there. 1500s, 1600s, charter towns everywhere. There's monasteries competing for monks. We have apprenticeships. That's one of his big points is the apprenticeship system was huge in Europe, and universities, another really big one that we haven't covered yet. They're all competing. They're all pooling information together. They're all communicating across state lines, and they're all evolving techniques for stuff and cultivating the positive sum attitude. If you're the Kabyle peasant herder, there's not a lot of positive sum. There's so many animals that this environment can sustain, where here, if you discover a better method for this, I can take it here and make money off of it. So, quote, when viewed in the context of these social, psychological, and institutional changes which accumulated gradually, Europe's technological and economic acceleration seems a lot less puzzling.
We got a really cool study showing how much better larger information networks are. Jay, cover the study for us. I don't remember this one specifically.
Okay. So yeah, this was a cool one. So they give you a tricky piece of software that is difficult to use. They give you an end product. Maybe it's Photoshop. We want you to Photoshop a picture that looks like this. You got to paint in the layers. You got to figure out how to use it. Everybody fails. Okay. The first round. But the thing that makes the study cool is they wrote down tips for the next person to come, maybe it's a notepad at that computer. Next person sits down. Hey, check out layers, and you can start masking layers or whatever. So slowly over time, they get a little better, but not very much. Then here's the real cool bit is they broke people into two groups. The first group was you only got tips from one person, and it was like a lineage. Everybody wrote down on the notepad. So got slightly better over time. But the second group had 5 people's tips that they could all wrote down on the same notepad. They were all learning from each other. After a few generations, the first group stopped improving, where the second group went from only 20% completion to 85% completion. So the difference was pulling tips from 5 different people is like a threshold shift. It's like a state shift. You're able to actually complete the task, where in the first group, with only one lineage of information coming at you, there's no improvement. So, you've got to be able to pull from a lot of people, and then boom, threshold. So he says, this is such a great point. If you're just walking into the room, you'd think that the people in the second group were much smarter, but they're just pulling from a larger information pool. So that ties into Guns, Germs, and Steel too, because his main point from that book was that the Eurasian landmass was at the right meridian or latitude level to grow these crops. They had the right crops. They had enough pool of animals to domesticate. And then, boom, you spend 10,000 years with these crops, with these animals, and you're able to spread them out east-west. That's where cultural evolution can kick in, and you can develop some real good governments or whatever.
You have a bigger set of people to copy, to learn from, to teach you to be better in your next generation.
Secret of our success, too. He's like, imagine you're a European explorer and you come down, how are you going to make an arrow? Do you know you got to use these 10 plants and animals to make an arrowhead? No, but if you're pooling from 100,000 tribe members or whatever, that information gets dispersed. Everybody can just make one tiny little adjustment to improve it, and boom, now you've got real good arrows.
Really cool study. And you're bringing up Guns, Germs, and Steel, and that really brings up sort of the meta point of this entire book. Why Western Europe? Why weird? Why was it? That's a question that Books Brothers asks in a lot of our episodes, right? And he covers the other explanations because they had representative governments. They had impersonal commerce. Western Europe discovered the Americas. There's a lot of coal in England. European coastlines, great for, shipping. Enlightenment thinkers were brilliant, and they really brought us together. A lot of competitive warfare across the European continent. Culture of science. But Henrik is saying all of that is true in its own way, but what all of that misses is an understanding of the psychological differences of these Western Europe people, the underpinnings of what created the weird people was all of that happening at the same time was creating psychological differences in their brains. So I just want to kind of wrap that together. That's what Henrik, yes, all is true. your guns, germs, and steels, and everybody else is correct, but they miss the brain changes. That's what we're really going for here.
So he says that Guns, Germs, and Steel was like his favorite book, and that's kind of where these last two books that we've covered have come out of him reading it and his answer. And he says Guns, Germs, and Steel takes you to about 1000 AD, and then from there, it's the psychology that the church is helping to form in Northwest Europe that really brings us to the next level. Because speaking of pooling larger information, that's what the university system that Northwest Europe developed was really good at. We're giving the smartest people places to work. We're giving them now there's printing presses so they can disseminate their work. The people are writing letters. He talks about a republic of letters where people are communicating different ideas and developing new inventions and everything. They've got property rights so they can hold on and make money from those inventions. Quote, by the 16th century, a mobile community of individualistic and analytically oriented thinkers had begun to form a loose web called the Republic of Letters that networked much of Western and Central Europe. But you can't just send letters without commerce. That the letters are riding on commerce's back. So the commerce is helping kick this all off. He makes a cool point that people were in touch even through wars, like England and the Netherlands had a war, whatever. But the scientists and the inventors are still communicating with each other through the wars. They're still reading Newton in the Netherlands. They're developing the glass lenses or whatever to, microscopes and telescopes and all that kind of stuff.
And the power of the Republic of Letters is the ability for different cultures to learn from each other, to improve upon each other. And this isn't just a study in some lab about a game, we completed it at 85%. This is, listen to this one. James Watt, he didn't invent the steam engine out of nowhere. He added a condenser to some other guy's engine, and that made it work really well. But that was just one step more. Goodyear added sulfur to latex because someone else said, hey, you should probably add sulfur to that.
But I think that's like vulcanizing. That's how we created rubber that was durable enough to, actually form tires.
Edison, there was already light bulbs out there. He just made a better one. So it's like,
I think he was like the 43rd patent or something on a light bulb. He just found the right filament or whatever.
And then you got the French. Well, during this whole process, the French had a little hiccup there. They started cracking down on the Protestants. And what happened was they had a guy who theorized a steam engine in France, but he was Protestant, so he was turned into a refugee. And Henrik says in the book, hey, man, hey, French, maybe with a little more freedom, you guys would have claimed invention of the steam engine, but you kicked your steam engine inventor out,
Yeah. So he's clearly a proponent for diversity and maybe more openness to ideas and immigration and all that, because all the studies that he's reading are showing that bringing people with various ideas together increase innovation. This whole chapter being about how innovation is just improving on little bits of other people's ideas and the free flow of ideas and all that, which is something that Asia and Middle East never had, no ecosystem for innovation.
It was in the previous chapter, and I just saw it in the book, but he completely shreds all the Enlightenment thinkers. Basically, they were all standing on the shoulders of a great society, and they just tweaked a little bit here and there, and we all consider them these incredible, thought-provoking, guys, and just F those guys. They're just one more step, So I'm
those
definitely
pretty strong, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely colorizing his language, but that's the point I got.
Yeah, for sure. These people are all reading each other. There's different, they're getting their ideas from other places, whatever. So here's the big long quote we're basically done with the book. And so here's the, one of the big sum up quotes. Of course, there are many economic and geographic factors that matter too. That's what Andrew's talking about. But if there's a secret ingredient in the recipe for Europe's collective brain, it's the psychological package of individualism, analytic orientation, positive sum thinking, impersonal pro-sociality that had been simmering for centuries. To explain the innovation-driven economic expansion of the last few centuries, I've argued that the social changes and psychological shifts sparked by the church's dismantling of intensive kinship, open the flow of information through an ever-broadening social network that wired together diverse minds across Christendom. In laying this out, I highlighted 7 contributors to Europe's collective brain. Number 1, apprenticeship institutions, which unfortunately we didn't talk about. That was a really cool bit in the book. You have to read the book. 2, urbanization and impersonal markets. 3, trans-regional monastic orders. 4, universities. 5, Republic of Letters. 6, knowledge societies and their encyclopedia. And 7, new religious faiths that not only promoted literacy and schooling, but also made industriousness, scientific insight, and pragmatic achievement sacred.
Boom. Dude, that quote pulls together the whole book really well. That's where we're really gelling this thing together. And we got the final chapter here. Chapter 14, Dark Matter of History, Cultural Evolution Shaped Our Genes. That's the secrets of our success, I believe. Correct, Jay?
Yeah.
And kin groups organized hunter-gatherer groups. Then we had to defend and irrigate agricultural land. So we had to create better, stronger, more cooperative kin groups.
Accelerated our need to form tight-knit groups, in groups and out groups, basically.
Quote, alongside kinship, both religions and rituals have also been culturally evolving over eons to harness aspects of our species' evolved psychology in ways that expand the social sphere and foster cooperation in larger groups. However, the emergence of diverse universalizing religions with development of cosmopolitan empires provided new opportunities for cultural evolution to experiment with a variety of divine prescriptions and prohibitions related to marriage and the family. End quote. That's the Catholic Church Marriage and Family Program, the MFP, being the highlighted one there.
Yeah, so it's like, kin groups have been competing and kind of evolving different things. And on top of that, then religions have been competing and evolving. And the religions that have won out over the last couple thousand years are the universalizing religions. And then ironically, those universalizing religions kind of split up our kin groups and individuated us in our societies.
During the Roman Empire, Henrik says, Europe was a bubbling cauldron of paganism, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Mithraism, I don't know that one, and lots of different strains of Christianity. One strain of Christianity really stumbled on a peculiar set of taboos and prescriptions, which led to the marriage and family program, and that led to total destruction of kin groups in Europe. That's like a little headliney for you there. That marriage and family program changed our social environments, changed our psychology, made us more individualistic, analytically oriented, nonconformist, guilt-ridden, intention-focused, clamped down on polygamy, suppressed male-male competition, zero-sum thinking. We got urban centers, we got cities, we have impersonal markets, we got these universities and guilds all communicating, competing, improving on each other. This increased rule following, incentivize cultivating unique attributes like patience, self-discipline, positive sum thinking. Now, Jay, we're evolving new laws, religious faiths, economic institutions.
Shout out individual rights.
Give them a shout out.
And the new faith incentivizes literacy and hard work. So basically, Henrik's saying game over for stagnation. The literacy, the mental states, our analyzing of, giving people dispositions, cultivating attributes. This is his answer to Guns, Germs, and Steel, the last 1,000 years of psychological evolution. Last quote, the much heralded ideas of Western civilization like human rights, liberty, representative democracy, and science aren't monuments to pure reason or logic as so many assume. People didn't suddenly become rational during the Enlightenment of the 17th and 18th centuries and then invent the modern world. Instead, these institutions represent cumulative cultural products born from a particular cultural psychology that traces their origins back over centuries through a cascade of causal chains involving wars, markets, and monks to a peculiar package of incest taboos, marriage prohibitions, and family prescriptions that developed in a radical religious sect, Western Christianity. Wow. That's the sum up quote of the whole book.
That is it right there, dude. Wow. Yeah. And what a book this guy is. First of all, Henrik, first double pod for Books Bros.
Yeah. Props for that. 2 books that are just too good.
Really lines up all of the origins of political order stuff with like sort of the development of ancient religion stuff. Like really, really well done.
And cultural evolution.
Cultural evolution in there. I mean, he is really connecting a lot of dots as he should be, being a professor of anthropology at Harvard.
Yeah, he's in the economics department too. He's very interdisciplinary. which is cool. That's, I think, where all of the historical studies come from. Is like studying GDPs of certain areas based on when they got states or Christianity or clocks or whatever. It's cool stuff. I loved this book. I read it once. I was like, it's one of the first times I'm like immediate Brother Books podcast.
You came at me real hard after you read it, and I was like, good. And it took me about 2-3 weeks to read the whole thing. I was on vacation, so I had a lot of time. It is an incredible book. Like, it's not crazy hard. There you go. I want to challenge all the Books Bros listeners out there. Let us know in the comments if you're weird or not weird. and what did we get wrong about you not weird people? Because we don't really know what that's like.
Yeah, maybe we got a bunch of Indians in the audience. They're kind of straddling the border there. I think it's one of those things where the closer to the big cities you are, the weirder you're going to be. So